Hello everyone, Tim from Welcome to the Table, and today we are once again in my car to listen to me ramble about things. Today I want to ramble about something a bit more fluffy, I guess, and this is value in board games. So there's a problem with board games in that they can be expensive. They can be pretty darn expensive for what you get. And so I wanted to touch on, in my personal experience, what games have been the best value for money. And now this doesn't mean the cheapest ones. This means of the games that I own and that I've played, what games have enough stuff to make it that, it's constantly replayable or whatever the case may be. I'm going to talk about a few different games that I think are great value for money and why I think they are. And then, I'll give rough price point estimates because it's not an accurate thing. Like with board games, if you're buying them in a physical store, the prices aren't going to be the same across the board, so that's something to shop around for if you're interested in doing that, or you can just get them off of Amazon or something similar. I'm going to be talking in Canadian dollars though, so keep that in mind. So let's start with Trains. Trains is a very boring looking game, the box at least. The game itself kind of looks boring too, but it is a great game. I've mentioned this before in my deck builders episode, I believe, but it is a deck building game. Most deck building games are pretty good value for money just because you can get some relatively cheap expansions to extend the length of the game. There's two that I'm going to talk about in particular though, but yeah, Trains is one of them. And the reason I'm going to talk about Trains is, so back to what Trains is. Trains is a deck building game set in Japan. Each player is the owner of some Japan railway network, whatever. You're trying to expand your rail system, buy up real estate, the whole, expand stations, the whole shebang. Whoever gets the most points at the end wins. Now, it's a deck builder, which means you start with a very basic deck that represents your rail network, or not your network, your company, your business. And you can purchase more cards to add into that. But while you're doing basically anything constructive in that game, you're going to be also adding waste cards to your deck. And these are cards that do nothing. They just take up your hand. Now, the reason I want to say Trains is a great value for money proposition is one of the big things that deck builders do is they offer, so you'll have a set of 8 cards plus the basic cards that are always in the shop. In this case, the basic cards are express trains, limited express trains, apartments, towers, skyscrapers, lay rails, and station expansion. And then the other 8 cards that are in play are randomized for the different special trains or action cards or special types of rails or different things like that. What makes Trains such a good value for money proposition is these randomizer cards are what gives the game extended life, because you can mix up what set you're playing with every game. And Trains comes with a lot of these in the base game. It comes with a very good set of varied and unique additional cards, which means you can play the game multiple times in a row even and play with a completely different set of cards. And the important thing about that is, for a deck builder, the unique set of cards that you're using is the puzzle that you're going to be wrestling with. So every time you've got a different set of cards, there are certain cards that you might personally like to go for. Like there's a card, Control Room. It's a very expensive card, 7 currency, draw 3 cards. Very simple, very expensive. I love going for those cards whenever they're available. But there are other cards that are really good as combos. You know, there's one card that you might not think is great, but then you can combo things together. Like there's a card that lets you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, add 1 to your hand, and put the other 3 back on your deck in any order. Well, but then what if you have another card that lets you draw a card? Well, you can play this one to draw a card, and then put the card that you want on top of the deck, and then play this other one to draw a card and get that card that you wanted as well. You know, like different things like that. And that's the puzzle in a deck building game. And Trains, like I said, comes with a great variety of these cards. It also comes with a double-sided board, which is quite good too, because you know, the exact strategy you might want to go for is different whether you're playing in Tokyo or Osaka, because the board's slightly different. And the different sets of randomizers, and there's a bunch of different strategies too. You know, you can. Anyway, I guess you know, you can go for a real estate strategy where you're just buying up towers, skyscrapers, that kind of stuff to get you victory points, as well as slowly spreading your rail station out, or rail network out. You can just go for a fast game where you buy all the rails and things like that, spread your network out as fast as possible, taking stations that other people have already built to get yourself bonus points, but ending the game before they can capitalize off of the slower strategy they're going for. You know, there's all these different ways of playing. It can be yeah, it's good, and it's also very easy to learn. And yeah, with the extra cards that it's got, it's a great value proposition. The other deck builder I'm going to talk about, again, from my experience, is Arctic Scavengers. Now, I'm not going to say Arctic Scavengers the base game. There's a set that I got. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I cannot remember what it's called, unfortunately. Basically, Arctic Scavengers, when it released, came with a couple of mini expansions in the box, and then there was a smaller expansion that came out, the headquarters expansion, that had some more stuff. I guess that's the mini expansion. And then there was a bigger expansion, Recon, I think it was called. But there was the version that I bought came with all of that stuff in one box. Now, Arctic Scavengers is a weird deck builder because it doesn't have as many cards on offer. The offer in the shop, if you're playing with the base set, is the same every time. Where it's interesting is with the skirmish and the competitiveness and the junkyard pile, that kind of stuff. And some of the expansions adds more stuff to those things. It does have a few other cards it adds. You know, engineers, I think, is one of them, and medics, and that kind of stuff. Then it adds some gangs that you can give you a long-running goal. So again, changing the puzzle, which is good. But the Recon expansion adds a whole new set of cards. Like, even the basic cards that you start with, it replaces all of the basic cards with a completely different set, and every card in that set does something, like, is different, is unique to the new set, or unique to the original set, and that's great value for money. Now, yeah, so if you can get, I believe it's Arctic Scavengers Recon. There's a big box that came with all of that stuff in it. That's great value for money. The game is chunky enough that, you know, and competitive enough that you can play it multiple times. Like, we've yet to use any of the expansion content, really, just because every time we've played it, just about, it's been with somebody who's never played the game before. And the new stuff, you know, it's hard to learn all the little bitty stuff because, unlike most deck builders, Arctic Scavengers has some fiddly bits to it. So, you know, we want to get people to learn the game first before we jump into the big stuff. Now, next time I meet up with my friends, pretty sure all of them will have played it by then. So we might dig into some of the expansion content and actually be able to see what that stuff's like. But for now, we're just looking at it with the wide-eyed view of, oh, that would be cool, you know, without ever actually trying it. In due time. But that's a good value for money proposition. Another, let me think. I should say Mysterium. Mysterium's a great value for money proposition. It's a little more on the expensive side. The game looks gorgeous and comes with not necessarily a lot of content because even the expansions for it don't really add new I mean, I guess there is an expansion that supposedly adds some new puzzles to the game, but most of the game comes from the dream cards and the item cards and that kind of stuff that's on the table. But the great thing with Mysterium is it's an asymmetric board game, which means the game you're playing, if you're one of the psychics, is very different than the game you play as the ghost. And so, with that, you know, even with just the base game, there's enough there to keep you interested, because every player as the ghost interprets the dream cards they've got differently. Every player as the psychic interprets the dream cards they got differently. Like, everyone has their own style for this kind of thing, because it's a visual puzzle, right? It's an interpretation of imagery, abstract imagery. And so everyone's going to play it a little differently. And, you know, giving other people, once they're used to the mechanics of it, giving other people a chance to be the ghost and see what it's like on that side of things, you know, it mixes things up. So you can play that over and over and over again, you know, with different people as the ghost, and different groups, and different numbers of players. And Mysterium also has a difficulty tier, 3 tiers of difficulty that you can, if it's feeling a little too easy for you, go with the hard difficulty, or, you know, that kind of stuff. And so that's pretty good. Now, I'm going to limit this just to base games. Well, see, I want to say Pandemic is great value for money, but it's Pandemic as I have it, where I have 2 expansions for Pandemic. Pandemic as a base game, I mentioned this in the co-op game episode, Pandemic as a base game is solvable. You know, there's not very many characters. There's, you know, the puzzle is solvable. Once you get the expansions for it, though, even just the On the Brink expansion adds a ton of stuff. And the In the Lab expansion adds a bunch of stuff too. But even just with the one expansion, the game, it adds a lot to the game, as well as a new way of playing it, with one person being the bad guy. That's my head. Yeah. I'm going through a construction area, so it's slow going on the highway. It's whatever. And so that's good. Now, Pandemic in and of itself isn't too expensive. Adding an expansion can make it more expensive, so it's up to you whether you think that's worth it. But if you're interested in it, I would definitely say pick up the On the Brink expansion, because that adds a ton of great stuff to it. The In the Lab expansion is pretty good too. I prefer the content in the On the Brink expansion for the most part. The In the Lab expansion does add a lot, though. It adds a whole new puzzle with the lab, the titular lab, which is hard. That's that part of the game we have not really been able to figure out yet. It's tough. And then I gotta sneeze. Oh, pardon me. In the Lab also adds, which is cool, but I have not yet tried, it adds a team variant with, like, victory point objectives and stuff like that, where you can play it in 2 teams of 2, 2 teams of 3, 3 teams of 2. It lets you play with up to 6 players, whereas normally base game is 4. On the Brink, it lets you play with up to 5 with the Bioterrorist challenge, I think. But the In the Lab lets you play with up to 6, which is great. But that does get to be a bit on the more expensive side, because you're buying expansions for it. The other thing in the Lab, the other thing On the Brink adds, which was just a nice little thing. Like, I'm glad they did this. In the base game Pandemic, you store the disease cubes in these little Ziploc bags. Little fiddly Ziploc bags. They're about that big. On the Brink added Petri dishes. And that shouldn't be... It shouldn't be as good of a thing as it ended up being. But it was great. Like, it adds Petri dishes and then a label, and if you want to, you can name each of the viruses. Like, it was such a little thing that they didn't have to add, but it's great for a couple of reasons. One, it's an elegant storage solution, because it looks nice. It fits the theme of it, and it just looks nice. And two, It's nice to fiddle with. They're lovely to stack on stack. Yeah, they didn't have to add that. I'm glad they did. It's such a little thing, but whatever. I'm a child at heart. I'm going to talk about. Screw it. Let's just talk about it now. Twilight Imperium. I did an entire episode on this game. What am I? So Twilight Imperium, I still have not decided whether or not it's a good value proposition because the game is expensive, hundreds of dollars for all the content. 3rd edition in particular. 4th edition, only has the one box right now, so it's not quite as bad out of the gate. But it is an expensive game. But there's so much there. You just have to accept the fact that unless you're getting it to the table all the time, you might only play it a couple of times a year. And if that's something you're willing to commit to, great value for money. Because there have been people that are still playing 3rd edition. And 4th edition's out, but they've been playing that's the only big board game they play. People play it every week, every month. It's insane to me because how long it can take. But I guess if you outline, and I guess if you use the proper rule with the game over card and that kind of stuff, which we don't, might have to next time. But yeah, if that's something you're interested in, it's raining. It's kind of raining. Come on. I can see blue sky. Oh, great. Yeah, Twilight Imperium's a tough one because it is good value for money if you're playing it. Most of these other games aren't quite that long to play, so you'll be able to get them to the table a lot easier. What else should I talk about? Tales of the Arabian Nights. Let's talk about that one. This one is another one that's on the more expensive side, not quite on the level of Twilight Imperium. It's so Twilight Imperium can be a couple $100. Pandemic, $40 plus the expansions, another $30 kind of thing. What else did I talk about? Trains, you're looking at $40, $45. Tales of the Arabian Nights. Tales of the Arabian Nights, you're probably looking at $60, $70 for it. But what you get is very unique. What Tales of the Arabian Nights is it's a storytelling game based off of the 1001 Arabian Nights fable. And what you get, the way the game works, is you each play a character going around Arabia, encountering things, just having an adventure. You have a goal, and the point of the game is to just have an adventure. At the point that we're at, we just play the game to just enjoy the story of it. We don't necessarily play to win, we just play to have some fun. Because the game can do so well at that. What you get in the box is a book that's like this thick, and it's like this big. It's big. It's the Book of Tales. And so the version that you can buy right now, it's the 3rd version, I think. And there's the joke was, the first version had 1001 tales, or 1001 adventures. The second version, the people added another 1001. The third, they added another 1001. So there's like 3003, adventures. There's a lot of content there. The one thing that I would suggest, the game says it can be played 3 to 6 players. What we found is it seems to work the best 3 to 4, even 2. Even 2 players can work fine. Again, depending on how you're playing it. If you're playing to win, then, there's that. But if you're playing to just enjoy the stories, that can come of it. Because they can be really cool. I would say 3 is a great number. 4 is okay, because what happens in this game is you have one person whose turn it is, one person and then the people to your left and right, one has the Book of Tales, and the other has this reaction matrix that, depending on what you encounter, you'll have different options to respond, and then there's some dice there. There's a bit of role playing where it's like, oh, you encounter a princess. You can rob the princess. You can kidnap the princess. You can speak to the princess. You can what are some of the other ones? Seduce, I think, is one of them. Like, there's a bunch of different ways you can respond to all these different encounters. Like, oh, you're encountering a swirling vortex. You can hide, you can pray, you can run away, you can drink the vortex. Some of it's goofy, but it's entertaining, and it's cool to see the different stuff that ends up. And there's relics that change the story up. There's these special locations. There's a couple different sets of special locations. There's one that's on these encounter cards that it's like the Magnetic Mountain, where if you're in a desert space, then you can encounter this. And then there's these other like named locations across the board that you need to trigger something specific to be able to even go in, like the Dusty Lands, which is the home of the Efreet, the like genies, basically, flame people. There's the Mermaid Kingdom. There's the Sepulchre of Solomon. There's Stonehenge. There's the City of Brass, the Lake of Colors, like all these locations that normally you can't enter. But if you can get maybe a certain item or have a certain story beat happen, then it gives you access to go into these. And these are like the kind of like end game, here's the culmination of your adventure kind of things. And they're all really cool. We played the game a ton and have not really gotten bored of it. But again, like I said, it can take a while, especially with 6 players. Like if you're playing with 6 players, then only 3 people are ever engaged in the story at once, which is a bit especially because like your turn can take 20 minutes, depending on what actually happens. So yeah, great game. Recommend it more with 3 or 4 players, or even 2. There's a variant online somewhere for playing it solo, but I would say at least two players, just so that you're not spoiling anything for yourself, because the discovery is the appeal of that game. Yeah, $60-$70, that one's a bit more on the expensive side. Terra Mystica is another great value game. Out of the base game box, it's a huge, heavy box. There's 14 different races you can play as. There's 7 different colors, 2 per side. So yeah, 14. And then there's a ton of different victory point objectives. There's like a bunch of content just straight out of the box. And then there's a small box, or like a smaller expansion, the Fire and Ice expansion, that adds another 6 races, more objectives, a double-sided map, like a lot of content there. It is more on the expensive side as well, $60-$70. But it is a great game. It's been our go-to kind of Euro-style victory point game, like heavy Euro game. It's got area control, it's got resource management, it's got all that kind of stuff, and it's great. Some people are going to be put off by the theme because it is fantasy. There is a sci-fi version that came out. I don't remember what it's called. The Gaia Project, maybe? That might not be right. I don't remember what it's called. But there is a version that I think just came out this year or last year that is like set in space. But that's another great value game because the different races change up the puzzle. You can play that with up to 5, and there's 7 different colors of land, 14 different races. You can play with different races every time, different objectives every time. There's a lot there, and so that's another great value game. Rex, Fall of the Empire. So Rex is owned by Fantasy Flight. It's set in the same universe as Twilight Imperium, but it's basically a remake of the old Dune board game, Dune. sandworms and the spice. If you've ever played that, or if you've ever heard of that, that type of thing. And that's another interesting one because it's another asymmetric game. Asymmetric games generally are pretty good value propositions because they offer different ways to play the game every time. Like you don't have to play, you play a different team, you're playing a very different game. So that's another interesting one. It's more of a war game, heavy war game. It's got some cool stuff where the different races, some of them have special win conditions unique to them. Like one of them, you only play with this race if you're playing with the full 6 players, but one of them gets to kind of predict who they think is going to win and on what turn they're going to win. And if they're right at the end of the game, then they win instead. Like it's crazy. So then, they want to encourage that. It's ridiculous. And it's pretty good. It's more of a heavy game. It's not an easy game to learn. In the same vein, the Game of Thrones board game is probably a pretty good value proposition as well, because again, six factions, asymmetric setup. There's a bunch of event card, like stacks of event cards, so different stuff will happen every time. So that's probably a pretty good one. Both of those you're looking at $60-$70 for both of those. I would normally suggest games like Masquerade, Shadowhunters, Secret Hitler, just because they're cheaper games that you can play a lot, because they're more, with the hidden roles and with the teams and with the special abilities and that kind of stuff. They're games that you can play a lot with different player counts and have a different experience, and they're just generally enjoyable, games to play. So on the hidden role side, Secret Hitler, Resistance, and Werewolf, Ultimate Werewolf. There's also One Night Ultimate Werewolf, which is an interesting one too. But those games being hidden role games, there's a lot of replayability there. Werewolf in particular, if you get the Ultimate Werewolf Ultimate Werewolf edition of it, I think can be played with it's either 30 people or 60. I don't remember, but it can go up to a huge player count because of all the special roles that there were made for this game. There's a ton of them. Resistance maybe a bit less so. Resistance Avalon, if you're just looking to buy the one box and not worrying about the expansions, Resistance Avalon is probably pretty good because it has the special roles, and it has I talked about this in the hidden. I think I talked about this already. I'm having a hard time remembering. But there's special roles, there's unique items, there's a bunch of stuff that you can kind of add and take away as you want. So that'd be pretty good value for money. Secret Hitler, again, the player counts affect the powers that are in play, and it is another asymmetric hidden roles thing. Like being liberal versus fascist in that game is very different. But then even more so different is being Hitler, like the Secret Hitler in that game. Especially with the different player counts, because if you're playing with 5 or 6 people, then you only have one fascist and Hitler, and Hitler knows who the other fascist is. But if you're playing with 7 or 8, then you have 2 fascists and Hitler, but Hitler doesn't know who's on his team, they just know who he is, and same thing with 9 and 10. So the game's very different there. So those are pretty good. Masquerade and games like it, the simpler games, are pretty good value for money just because they're quick, they're easy to learn, there's a nice puzzle to them, and the different people play, you go in with different strategies. Masquerade, you're looking at I think $15 for it, maybe 20. Secret Hitler is something along the lines of 30, Resistance 20, 25, things along those lines. Werewolf, that's a bit trickier depending on what version you pick up. The One Night Werewolf versions, I think, are actually more expensive because it's all cardboard tokens rather than just cards. But, they're worth trying if you're looking for some good value. I guess now I should mention about legacy games. Before I do, Betrayal at House on the Hill. Betrayal at House on the Hill. I'm not sure if I like this game. The game is so weird. It simulates 80s B horror movies. Which one? All of them. All of them at the same time, basically. You never know what horror movie you're dealing with until partway through the game. And kind of the problem with this is there's twofold. The start of the game is slow and kind of boring as it's leading up to the haunt, where the interesting part of the game begins. And then when the haunt does trigger, more often than not, one of two things happens. Either the person that is now the bad guy, because that's how this works, is once the haunt triggers, one person's going to become the bad guy. Either the person who's now the bad guy has so much at his disposal, and it happened so early in the game that you just basically auto-win, or the person who's now the bad guy has an impossible task ahead of them and you just get annihilated. But it's such a cool thing that I'm willing to forgive it for that kind of stuff. And there's so much in there. There's, I think, 60 different scenarios you can play that all kind of, it all depends on the cards that you draw and that kind of stuff. There's an expansion that came out that adds more scenarios. And then there's the second edition, but they did Betrayal at Baldur's Gate, which is a D&D theme one, which I'm a little upset about because they did clean up a lot of the rules that were like fiddly and gimmicky in this second edition. But with the theme being D&D, less people are going to be interested in trying it. So, because Betrayal at House, it's 80s horror movies. Everyone knows that, and everyone can kind of get behind that. But then when you make it D&D, some people aren't going to like that. It's a bit harder for people to get engaged by that. There's a version coming that's a legacy version of it, which is interesting. And I guess now I should talk about legacy games. Legacy games are weird in that they offer some incredibly engaging gameplay for a limited amount of time. However, you might think, okay, well, with Risk Legacy, for example, you're looking at 10-15 games. How long do you think it's going to take you to play 10-15 games of Risk without just, grinding them out and getting them all done as fast as you can? Because then you're kind of defeating the purpose if you're doing it that way. And Pandemic Legacy takes place over a year, and every month is a different game. You can, there's the early and late if you win or lose. So you can have anywhere between 12 and 24 games of Pandemic Legacy, plus all the little legacy bits that happen in between games. Takes up time as well. So they're an interesting thing because they are so unique. You're not going to find that kind of a thing anywhere else in any other type of game because of how they're designed. They offer such a unique experience that while you're playing it, it is amazing. However, once you're done, what do you do? And that is a problem, but I feel like it's worth it. You're looking at Pandemic Legacy, $60 to $80, I think, for Season 1. I definitely recommend you start with Season 1. Depending on how often you meet up, this could take months to actually just get through. You play a couple of games every meetup. That's good. That's good value for money if it's taking you that long to get through and it's engaging and you're enjoying it. So I guess it's kind of up to you how you measure value in that case. If you're okay with having an incredibly engaging experience for a set amount of time and then you pack it away, they're great. It's kind of up to you at that point. In the similar vein, the games like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective and its different versions, they offer a similar thing where it's 10 cases. Once you finish the cases, that's kind of it. You can't really play them again. But, they offer such a unique experience. So, in that case, that's going to be up to you how much you if you want to play a board game into infinity. These games aren't going to let you do that. but maybe they're still worth it. That's kind of up to you. Anyway, I've given you some options. I'm sure there's other things that I'm not thinking of, and I may end up doing a follow-up on that, but I just wanted to give you some ideas about what I consider good value and some different price ranges, different styles of games, deck builders, war games, Euro games, hidden roles, that kind of stuff. Any of those games that I've mentioned, would be good. If you don't want to buy too many games, any of those games would be good. Some of the other ones that I've mentioned before, like Suburbia or Castles of Mad King Ludwig, if you get them with the expansions, they add a lot of replayability to it, like add a lot of life to it. Same thing with Pandemic, like I mentioned. So maybe do a little research there if it's something you might be interested in. That's going to be it for me today, though. My name is Tim from Welcome to the Table, and you've been with me in my car rambling while I drive to work. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.